the last session. It's about innovative finance and delivery models. I think we will touch upon many aspects that have been discussed before, anchor models, greening UN, and many other aspects. Susanne is the energy lead of SNV. Many of you know her. Over to you, Susanne.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you, Thomas. I'm just going to invite all panelists, all presenters to sit up here. Enjoy the view. Great, excellent. It's a very large panel, but we'll break it down into chunks. Before we start this afternoon session, I want to just take a few minutes to set the scene a little bit for this panel. We'll be talking about innovative finance and delivery models at scale. But when you read the program carefully, the session title is actually Green the Blue, End of Intervention or Beginning of Energy Access. I had to think about that one for a minute. What do we mean by that? Thomas, I forgot to ask you. I want an explanation later. Are we going to stop interventions as humanitarian organizations, implementing agencies, and leave it all to the private sector? Is that the beginning of having sustainable energy access in displacement settings? We'll explore this question a little bit more, maybe during the panel discussion. But meanwhile, let me just regurgitate some of the facts that have already been mentioned many times during this conference so far. But just to bring them home again, humanitarian energy funds have never been expansive, and grant funding is getting tighter every year. I understand that the funding gap in the humanitarian sector is at 52% now. In such a tight financial environment, traditional grant funding is simply insufficient, and experience has shown that actually it doesn't necessarily result in long-term sustainable energy use. We spend $1.6 billion every year, I assume in grant funding, on cooking and power for humanitarian operations. If we were to displace the diesel usage, we would have to install 118 megawatts of solar capacity. That's a bit less than half of Rwanda's installed electricity supply capacity. That would come at a cost of about $236 million. Mark, thank you very much for the numbers. And would save us about $70 million in fuel costs every year. Those payback periods sound pretty good to me. However, energy projects take about an average of 5 years from design to completion, if not longer, depending on the context. And this poses challenges on its own. Especially in these allegedly temporary settings that we're operating in. I'm saying allegedly because actually refugee camps these days are in place for an average of 18 years. Of course, that's skewed by the Dadaabs and Kakumas, but even individual refugees spend an average of 10 to 15 years in a displacement setting. That's not temporary anymore. So in this context, it just makes sense to actually build proper energy infrastructure and make it as green as possible. We have the timeframes, we have the institutional needs to move beyond the traditional grant funding and procurement structures of humanitarian organizations. We do need to remind ourselves that these structures were put in place to enable humanitarian organizations to respond to emergencies. But if your average refugee camp is in place for 18 years, that's not necessarily an emergency setting anymore, that's a protracted displacement setting. And so it makes sense to actually invest in greening energy infrastructure. If you attended this morning's session on clean cooking, where my colleague Caroline Groen presented our work in Kakuma and Kalobeye, you'll know that SNV, we're an international NGO originated in the Netherlands. We focus quite strongly on market-based energy access. We've been working on the challenges surrounding access to sustainable and affordable energy for quite some time, and have been taking a strong private sector-led approach in all our work. But the finance question has always been tricky and always a challenge, especially when it comes to greening institutional settings. So I'm very much looking forward to being inspired and learning from our panelists and presenters today about their work in this space. We'll have 4 quick lightning talks, 1 to 2 slides. We'll start with Boya Gomez Rojo from WFP, who will present about WFP's energy efficiency work. We'll hear from Mark Gibson about de-risking PPAs and leasing agreements through energy service companies. And then we'll focus a little bit more on the individual and community level. We'll talk to George Akute from Acumen about their Refugee Investment Fund, and Colm Fay from the Clean Cooking Alliance for the RBF Accelerator Program. We'll have a couple of deep dives afterwards. First, a presentation by Andrea from Humanitarian Energy, an Ethiopian company providing energy access solutions and services to humanitarian agencies in Ethiopia. And then Dave Mazursky from Energy Peace Partners. He will talk about their financing mechanism through renewable energy certificates. So I'll invite Borja, do I pronounce that correctly, to come up first, present, or do you want me to steer the presentation from here? And you stay seated?
Only one slide.
All right, okay.
Should I go there?
Yeah, just come here.
Oh, yeah.
Mix it up a little bit.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, honored to be invited to give us a very quick introduction of the energy efficiency program, of World Food Program, and also very happy to see so many beautiful and very dear faces of my NORCAP fellows, and the rest of my friends here, obviously. Okay, so I will be very, very quick. The energy efficiency program, well, the name is a little bit, well, it was created in 2012. So nowadays it should be called decarbonization program of World Food Program operations. It was created in 2012, and I said, and it has had a little bit of a bumpy road, but now it's in full steam and really want to be a game changer in the organization. So what we do, very, very simple, we just try to decarbonize our operations, starting with facilities, that means warehouse, guest houses and offices, and beyond, obviously. But then the innovative finance here is, well, first of all, we try to cover up to 75% of the cost of the projects, or the extra cost of the projects. And the innovative idea here is that the funding is coming from an internal carbon tax in the organization. So from that point of view, funds are coming in a very sustainable manner, and very, actually quite secure for the program. Something that I'm very happy with. This is the program, right? This is the introduction of the program. Then I want to stress a couple of ideas. One is that I think I will join the words that I think was Andrew Harper said before. Scale up, really looking at larger projects as much as we can. Why? For many reasons. One of them is because the market is ready, and actually we can really achieve economies of scales that way. And I'm saying that to myself. Actually, the picture here is from our last implemented project in the Kakuma camp. We were just replacing a diesel generator there with a solar and battery system. And it's only 14 kilowatts, so it's really not big. But we want to really go larger, a larger scale. It happens that I was last week in Munich in Intersolar conference, and the amount of projects and the megawatts that the utility scale business is talking, it's amazing. It's just ridiculous comparing to what we're talking about. So the market is really waiting for us to say how big we can provide their business, because otherwise 1 megawatt maximum, they might not be interested. So yeah, scaling up. And then the other question is, the other thing that I wanted to mention here is partnership and collaboration. I think we are very grateful with NORCAP and GIZ that we are collaborating in Nigeria. A number of ICRC, we want to really get closer in our collaboration, because at the end we are all talking about the same thing from different perspectives, but we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. The community of practice that has been already mentioned, copying ideas, as Thomas said in the morning. And then my last words, I want to mention again the anchor loads. This is an opportunity, this energy efficiency program, or any decarbonization effort that the organizations are doing, is actually a train that nobody can miss, because this is the anchor load that sometimes the mini grids provider will be very, very happy to partner with. And with that we can really, it's another way of subsidizing, the energy consumer in the other side of the fence. That's it. I think I would really like to, I'm learning a lot from all of you, but I'm quite open, and my colleagues in Rome quite open to partner, to do this together. I just had a conversation with IOM people that we really need to do more together, and I think that's my final message. Thank you very much.
Great, Mark is already on the way. Thank you.
Hopefully it is. Can we have it? Great. Where am I pointing it? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Gibson. I'm the operational lead for the GPA and also a NORCAP deployee. Today, I'd really like to take a very quick overview of a de-risking mechanism for power purchase agreements and leasing agreements that we've been working on with our partners. We need to really take a step back from this to understand the delivery mechanism that we're discussing before we get into the de-risking mechanism itself. Technology. Okay, pardon. First off, I'd like to go through the existing model that we look at from a UN perspective when we're looking at solarizing our offices. What tends to happen is we get a grant from a donor that allows us to buy a solar solution. From that, we get free electricity, but we really need to focus on the maintenance of that. We've seen so many examples in this place where we've installed a solar solution and it's broken down within the first few months because we don't have the capacity, the money, or even a service contract to look after that. So it's something that we really focus on. So that's our traditional model of delivering solar solutions. The new model, it's not new, but it's the new model for us in the humanitarian space, is looking at energy service. And what we mean by this is actually buying electricity from a company that owns, operates, and maintains the solar system that is on our facility. And how this is funded is through a long-term contract. The length of that contract allows the private sector to go to its finance partners and invest in purchasing that. It's great for us from a humanitarian space because we don't need to find that capital. And why that is important is for two reasons. First off, traditional humanitarian donors want to see their money directed at the displaced community. They don't want us to invest in solar solutions for our offices, and that's understandable. Secondly, our donors expect us to be, I'll find my words here. We need to manage our resources in a cost-effective manner. So if there is a cheaper solution, they expect us to use the cheaper solution, not find reasons not to. The devil is in the detail with this proposal. Sorry, I just lost my space. Yeah, sorry. I've just come from downstairs. I'm changing my topic completely. Yeah, just to go through this, let me reset myself. So we have this long-term contract. It allows the partner to go out to get funding for that. It's operated and maintained, by which time we just pay a monthly fee for the electricity, like we do at home. We don't have to worry about the maintenance of it. We don't have to worry about anything. We pay an agreed fee for that electricity. As I said, the problem with this is the devil in the detail. It's the termination clause within the long-term agreement. As the UN, anything that lasts more than 12 months must have a termination clause. That termination clause states that within 30 days of receiving a letter, that contract is null and void. The private sector is looking for a 10-year, 15-year contract. That's great when they're looking for private finance. They can get money on that. But when they submit it to their lawyers, their financiers, and say, we've got this long-term agreement with the UN, they go through it and they say, this termination clause, this contract is not worth 10, 15 years. It's worth 30 days. How can we go out and get money to pay for a system on a contract that's worth 30 days? So the result is that many energy service companies do not tender for this work because they see it's too risky. What's the value in this? I'm trying to take money for this, and I have no guarantee that I'm going to get my money back and make profit from this. Okay. So to deliver the solution, we've been working with our partners within the private sector and with the UN to understand where the problems lie. And with this, there was a project we worked with our partners, with Energy MRC. We looked at this, we did some modeling, and what we actually came up with is a two-phase solution. The first phase was if the contract was terminated, we'd enter a 12-month liquidity phase. And what this allows is to draw down on a fund that would give 12 months of time for people to find a solution for the existing solar plant that's there. Can we, for instance, if the UN is moving, can that system go with them? Is a new tenant coming into that facility? And if that tenant is coming in, can they actually take over that PPA, that lease agreement? Can it be sold and still make money and pay off the investment? So we have this 12-month period to actually find a viable solution. And then if we don't find a viable solution, there's a third-party guarantee mechanism. So it's like an insurance policy. If we can't find a solution, then money will be paid back to the energy service company, and it will pay off its investments. This allows the private sector to enter this space and move with leasing agreements as we go forward. 1 minute. But just to really sort of push this point is, within the UN, if we had a $6 million fund, that could leverage $65 million of private investment, which would actually result in 700 humanitarian facilities being solarized. And as Borja said, what we're actually looking for is actually use the UN as an anchor client. So we have this leasing agreement, this PPA, that we can actually use blended finance to oversize and reach out into the community, so we can have household energy access. We can have community projects on that, and we can have livelihood developments. Sorry, that was 3 years worth of work squeezed very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I was wondering how you're managing with all these presentations throughout the day, so well done. George, please take us to the individual and community level for financing energy access.
Thank you. Yeah. For this particular presentation, you're not going to have a slide. We considered 5 minutes to be short to have a slide. It will be distracting us. I'm really excited to be here and to attend these sessions. They are really insightful and eye-opening and informing a lot of what we are also implementing within the energy space. For those who do not know who Acumen is a non-profit that is changing the way the world is tackling poverty by investing in sustainable businesses, leaders, and ideas. In East Africa, Acumen is focusing on 3 main sectors, that is agriculture, energy, and education. So through its foregoing activity in the region, Acumen has experience in the off-grid market. In the humanitarian context, in many years, Acumen has been active in East Africa for more than 11 years so far. And this is through the various portfolio companies that we have invested in. To name just a few, they are the likes of PowerGen, D-Light, Burn Manufacturing Company, Easy Solar, who are all having elements that touch on humanitarian elements. And recently, we have started to explore refugee lens investing. And I know this might have come up before, but for clarity, I mean, who is a refugee in this context? So we have adopted a definition that has been coined by the Refugee Investment Network, which includes all forcibly displaced persons. And these could be your internally displaced people. It could be your, refugee as we know them, cross-border, and then asylum seekers as well, together with the host communities where these groups exist. And we know that these come from various causes. It could be conflicts or even climate crisis, as we are already seeing around us. And why should it be innovative at this point? As when the session was being introduced, you heard very well that resources are becoming constrained. And so it's becoming a little bit more difficult to just issue the normal aid that has been flowing around. And so what players in this space are doing is coming up with models that are sustainable, but that also will bring out these capabilities, special capabilities and skills that the refugees also have. And while implementing this, we will be targeting entities that are refugee-led, refugee-serving, or even refugee employing. And Acumen, in partnership with the Refugee Investment Network, has teamed up with the Swiss SDC, JICA, as well as the IKEA Foundation, in exploring this refugee lens investing network, strategy in East Africa. And what is happening is, should this be successful, should we find this to be a sustainable or rather a viable investment thesis, and in the process also develop a strong pipeline, then we are intending to launch this in the fall. And this will be supporting our investing in our priority areas, which are 1, resilient agriculture, as I've mentioned, and then 2, K-12 education, and then lastly, productive use of energy. And it will also overlay with our existing geographic mandate, which includes Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Ethiopia as well. Through the Phase 1 project, we have launched an accelerator program, which we are calling Accelerator for Ventures Supporting Displaced People. We have closed it so far, having received more than 100 applications. And out of this, we intend to select 15 to 20 entities that we will include in the program as we roll it out. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Delighted to be here. My name is Colin Fay. I'm a Senior Director on the Market Strengthening Team at the Clean Cooking Alliance. I want to talk about results-based financing for clean cooking. To start with, I want to do a little bit of context setting. There are about 2.6 billion people globally who still lack access to clean cooking. That costs the global economy $2.4 trillion per year, and results in 4 million premature deaths that come about from exposure to household air pollution. That pollution contributes 120 million tons of climate pollutants annually per year. In order to achieve universal access to clean cooking, the sector needs an investment of $4.5 billion per year from now until 2030. We're currently tracking investment in the clean cooking sector in the order of tens of millions. There's a lot of financial innovation required to massively increase the capital flows in the clean cooking sector. And we see results-based financing as being at the forefront of that financing innovation. The RBF approach is probably familiar to a lot of us, but it starts with a payer who defines specific results that they want to achieve in terms of access to clean cooking, distribution of clean cooking products, and sets targets for those results. They enter into a contract with a clean cooking enterprise or with an implementing partner to then distribute those clean cooking products to markets that are currently underserved. The results of that, has a clean cook stove been distributed? Is it being used? Is it in the field and producing results? That's verified by an independent verification partner, and then on the result of that verification, payment is dispersed. Now, there's a wide range of models that implement this basic approach. There are traditional output-based cash transfer models that subsidize both on the supply side of the market, on the demand side of the market. But there are also other models like prizes or challenge funds that follow these same basic principles. And of course, carbon financing follows the same principle as well. So what makes that different from traditional sources of development finance? First of all, RBF programs are very clear on the what, but very flexible on the how. So there's a lot of effort that is put in up front to define standards, targets, and results. But implementers are free to innovate in terms of how those results are achieved. As long as those are verifiable, the payer essentially is very flexible on how that happens. Implementers are incentivized then to learn and increase their efficiency. Any reduction in the cost of delivering these programs mean that the implementer gains that benefit. That may become additional margin for a clean cooking enterprise, for example, if they can drive down the costs, improve their efficiency as they go. So in terms of thinking about results-based financing in humanitarian settings, RBFs provide a continuous model of support as long as those results keep being achieved, rather than being a one-off intervention. So this supports both short-term objectives. So for example, providing end-user subsidies to households where affordability might be the main barrier to uptake. These models also support longer-term objectives. So for example, supply-side subsidies that might reduce the initial high cost for companies of setting up sustainable operations in currently underserved markets. Now, results-based financing programs in very well understood contexts can be quite complex, a complex system of standards and incentives and verification processes, because they're aiming to achieve specific shifts in an existing market. The majority of disbursement and payment happens after results are verified. So carbon finance is a good example of that type of model where it's quite a complex system of standards, methodologies, etc. But results-based financing in higher risk, in high uncertainty contexts can actually be designed to be quite simple. So prizes or challenge funds, for example, might have larger upfront payments to cover the additional risk involved, and they emphasize learning and experimentation, and so are quite useful in those higher uncertainty contexts. And then lastly, learning in RBF programs is integrated into the incentives and adaptive, so appropriate for contexts that are highly uncertain, but also might be subject to change. So as more data and more information is made available from those programs, solutions might make way for more complex interventions that are more prescriptive. I want to jump on a little bit to the results-based financing accelerator at the Clean Cooking Alliance. Okay. The results-based financing accelerator is a multi-party platform that aims to unlock that massive amount of funding that is necessary to transform the clean cooking sector via results-based financing. And rather than being an RBF program itself, the accelerator aims to be a repository of data, of knowledge, and of expertise that supports funders to rapidly design new RBF tools and to reduce the overall transaction cost of operating those tools. And then finally, the accelerator aims to engage payers or outcome buyers that are interested not only in outputs, but also paying for impacts, such as health improvements, carbon emissions reductions, or improved livelihoods. And by monetizing those impacts, more capital can be made available to support longer-term clean cooking business models that benefit both people and the planet. Thank you.
Excellent. I'm not sure if you're all as dissatisfied as me. I would love to hear so much more about these mechanisms and learn a lot more. So I think you guys will be very popular during the networking session this evening. And I hope you have some reports that you can share or any further information. Love the idea of using carbon finance from an internal source at WFP. I'm going to propose that in SNV. Also the point on temporary, on de-risking, a de-risking measure once a temporary setting ends, it actually answers one of the questions that I had for the panel discussion. So thanks, Mark. George, thanks so much for mentioning productive uses of energy towards the end of your presentation. Bringing communities and individuals up the energy ladder through investment support is definitely a key topic to look at as well. And the RBF accelerator, bringing the knowledge together and to design RBFs and also look at how to use RBF for end-user subsidy. Traditionally, RBFs are not supposed to reduce the end-user price. It's supposed to be a market tool, but I think we've agreed throughout the day today that end-user subsidies are justified and needed. You're not here to listen to me. You want to hear the deep dives. So please, I'm asking for Andrea to come up and give his deep dive presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon and good morning, depending where you are connecting from. My name is Andrea Danici, and I'm the Managing Director of Human. Human is an Ethiopian private limited company, incorporated in Ethiopia, with the ambition to become the partner of choice for the humanitarian world in its search for clean and sustainable energy services. We've been created by the collaborative work of two corporate shareholders. Mercy Corps Global is the main shareholder of this venture. I guess you all know them as one of the leading organizations for humanitarian response and disaster relief. And we also bring within the company the expertise of Francis Engineering and Trading PLC, an Ethiopian company with a long track record of off-grid solution in Ethiopia. Let me see if we can get to the next slide. All right. So there are at least 4.7 million FDPs in Ethiopia. These data referred to before the conflict that affected the country the last 6 months. And it is estimated that less than 7% of them have access to energy. However, the perception of temporary nature of refugees has hindered private sector involvement. As Suzanne mentioned, this is not true. An average lifespan of a refugee camp is now around 18 years, so shows that this is no longer the reality. Adding to that, there's a mismatch of time horizons between humanitarian and development sector. I think also Mark mentioned, we are moving to long-term engagement if we are to have private sector involved in capital-intensive infrastructure, and this is not evident in the humanitarian world. This, at least until now. This is our value proposition. We have 2 business models. One is a typical mini-grid serving refugee communities and their hosts through retail of kilowatt-hour on prepaid basis. We provide affordable services that can compete and beat current solutions that are fossil fuel-based. The second one are asset leasing, typically called ESCO in the energy sector. And there's a complementarity between these two business models. In a way, ESCO are usually medium to short term and somehow help mini-grids also to become more viable during shortage of cash flow during the first years of operation of mini-grids. We bundle operations. I guess it's no surprise that operating in humanitarian setting is expensive. We're talking about remote areas where from investment cost, talking about logistics and deployment, to operational, by keeping staff on the field in remote areas, can only be sustained to the extent we can bundle project and mutualize those costs for higher efficiency. We do provide energy as service, and this indeed goes in the same direction like also Mark mentioned. While it is somehow evident for mini-grids, while we retain ownership of these mini-grids and we operate as a private company, the same applies for this asset leasing for captive users. We deploy, we finance, we install, and we operate on behalf of our client against an asset leasing contract. And we have the quite unique advantage of the complementarity of skills of our shareholders. Mercy Corps brings the humanitarian skills and logistic capacity in such areas, while Rensis provides the local content and technical skills to allow us to succeed. A few more points to be added is we are here to stay. We're not a project, we're not a program, we're a company. We invest in capital-intensive infrastructures that need to be remunerated, and they are remunerated over time. Typical break-even ranges from 7 to 10 years. This is the minimum for us to stay, at least to break even our investment. And therefore, we can provide that long-term sustainability that everybody's seeking for in the sector. And due to our unique positioning and our strong mandate that has been transferred from Mercy Corps to us, we are able to attract both public and private investment. We have a humanitarian mandate, we supply humanitarian work, but we do it profitably, or at least we seek to do so. And that's why we are able also to attract patient investors that seek return on their investment. We're also scalable and replicable for the same reason. We have revenues, and while we depend on capitalization for the first years of operation, we'll be able to increasingly depend and leverage on our revenues as cash flows that we can reinvest onto further expansion. And this is not an option, this is a need for us to become sustainable. And last but not least, we are green and sustainable. Most of our operation focus on phasing out diesel operation to the advantage of solar or any other renewable technology. As mentioned before, 2 business models, highly complementary. Solar hybrid mini-grids, for our specific case in Ethiopia, 24 hours a day, reliable service guaranteed. And the second one targets agencies such as UN compound, NGOs, as well as operation. Think of water distribution systems that usually consume a large amount of diesel. We are able to supply those by solarizing or hybridizing them at our own cost and be remunerated over time with a fee that includes operation and maintenance. So hassle-free, no expertise required by our clients, turnkey solution. We have decided to start from the Somali, we have decided to start with a capitalization. We've been capitalized by our shareholder with up to 3 million USD. This allows us to start with our first pilot of projects. We have a quite large portfolio that will cover us at least for the next 12 to 18 months of operations. This will allow us to test and refine our model as we scale by leveraging for additional funds. We have a consortium of well-established international and national companies for our engineering, procurement, and construction, with which we have been collaborated over the last 6 months. And we will delegate operations to Rensis, our national partner, due to the strong expertise and local content and capability to operate in difficult and rural areas. We are starting from the Somali regional state of Ethiopia in the Far East. As you can see, we are bundling our operations for the same reason we discussed before. We're focusing on Jijiga area, Goda area, and Doloado area, both mini-grid and solarization of captive users. We will be working, and we are in advanced stages of negotiation with WFP, with Roya's colleague in Ethiopia, indeed with the aim to phase out their diesel operations, but also Mercy Corps compounds and facilities. And when it comes to when, looks quite an ambitious plan. We have only been incorporated 3 months ago, but we have already managed to secure the first investment permit ever issued in Ethiopia to a company with foreign capital for mini-grids. So we're paving the way not only to humanitarian world, but anything concerning mini-grids and off-grid solutions. We are in the final phase of our negotiation and engineering, and we will be able to start procuring the second half of this year with the aim to commission our facility in the first half of next year. So we have a quite well-defined timeline, and we are very much excited and bound to it. So this is a bit of an overview of who we are, and we're very excited to be here today with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. You saved us a couple of minutes, so that's perfect. No, please, Dave, come. And yeah, over to you.
Thank you very much. I have the enviable slot of being final speaker in the second afternoon session. So, my name is Dave Mazurski. I work with an organization called Energy Peace Partners, which works on the idea of renewable energy as a tool for peace in fragile states. And we bring together folks with expertise and backgrounds in conflict resolution and peace building, together with expertise in renewable energy development and finance. And I'll be speaking about a case study on the IOM Humanitarian Hub in Malakal, South Sudan, where we tested the Peace Renewable Energy Credits, which is our financial innovation. So, Thomas mentioned earlier that we were working on carbon credits in humanitarian settings. It's not exactly right. RECs, or renewable energy certificates, are a sister mechanism to carbon credits, so just to clarify. A REC represents a megawatt hour, the environmental claim to a megawatt hour of clean energy. And so in many renewable energy markets around the world, there are robust REC markets with both primarily voluntary buyers of these environmental claims. And so it allows for a renewable energy project to monetize the renewable energy in a new way. In addition to selling the energy, you can sell the environmental claim to corporates. And so our focus on fragile states, on settings with conflict risk, climate vulnerability, energy poverty, as we've heard all day, there are challenges in financing and investment for renewable energy projects. So the PREC is a high impact REC, and we at EPP have worked to connect the REC architecture, the international REC architecture, to be able to issue peace RECs, or PRECs, from these projects and connect them to corporate voluntary markets. So it offers a new way to monetize renewable energy from new high impact projects in fragile settings. Our role is as the issuer, So we are authorized by the International REC standard. We provide the verification, the project qualification, and we make sure that the RECs that are issued ultimately represent a real project. So it represents the renewable energy generated as well as the social and economic co-benefits of that project. So the pilot I'll be talking about is one with IOM in Malakal, South Sudan. They were generated from a 700 kilowatt solar system that IOM built in the Humanitarian Hub. The Humanitarian Hub sits adjacent to Malakal IDP camp, which houses over 30,000 IDPs. The photo on top shows the IDP camp at the top, and the little finger at the bottom is the Humanitarian Hub. So IOM runs the Humanitarian Hub. It houses and supports over 30 UN agencies and NGOs that work and provide services to the camp. And the photo on the bottom is one part of that 700 kilowatt system. And so PRECs allowed for IOM to extend the impact of that project. And in late 2021, there was a PREC agreement reached between IOM and 3 Degrees, which is a carbon trader, for the PRECs from that 700 kilowatt system. The PRECs were eventually transferred to Block, which is an international financial services company, and they provided a new way to create value from that renewable energy system. And the transaction, the funding, allows IOM to fund the solar electrification of Malakal Teaching Hospital, which is the main healthcare facility serving the city of Malakal. The city of Malakal is a regional capital in South Sudan that has been destroyed in the civil war. And the hospital struggles with lack of power. It has diesel generators, but diesel is inconsistent and expensive. And so providing 24/7 electricity will provide a significant benefit to the hospital and the communities that they serve. So our role, again, EPP, will be to register the IOM solar project, issue the PRECs, but we work together with IOM and the other partners to facilitate this, this project. So as mentioned, the innovation is the PRECs. And so this particular project was groundbreaking in a few ways. The first is what IOM itself did was groundbreaking. The IOM solar system, I believe, was the first PPA project for any UN entity. And it was built in 2020 as a PPA type deal with a Norwegian renewable energy company, Scatec. The PREC issuance, these are the first PRECs ever to be issued from South Sudan. This is the first ever PREC agreement with a UN agency or UN entity. And we are working to expand the PREC market to other fragile states. So far there have been PREC pilots, successful PREC transactions from DRC and South Sudan, and we are authorized as the international REC issuer in DRC, South Sudan, Somalia, and Chad. And so we are working to grow that market. There were a number of challenges that we faced. The first is that it moved very slowly, but it was successful in the end, so we'll focus on that. The second is that it required a lot of flexibility. Because it's a UN entity, IOM cannot actually sell PRECs or carbon credits. They can't generate profit. So we had to work out a creative solution where essentially there was what amounted to kind of a dual donation, where 3 Degrees provided funding for a project to IOM, and the PRECs were transacted, were donated to 3 Degrees, and then the corporate buyer Block ultimately purchased them from 3 Degrees. And what that means is that we now have a replicable model for issuing PRECs from projects of UN-owned or supported renewable energy projects, and this can be scaled and used elsewhere. Just to mention briefly another case that we did, this was the very first PREC sale from DRC. These were purchased by Microsoft. It wasn't an explicitly humanitarian setting, but just to give it another example, 1.3 megawatt solar project in eastern DRC built by a Congolese company called Nuru. The core project itself was already financed, so when Microsoft was interested in purchasing PRECs, Nuru consulted the community. They expressed an interest in and a need for nighttime lighting. Nuru's purchase funded the installation of streetlights in Goma. And these are the 3 transactions that we have so far. I think, and benefits that they provided to the corporate buyers, to the project developers who are able to monetize, and to the local communities. I think what is interesting and what I would flag is that the motivations of the corporate buyers are different in every case, but there is growing demand. We are hearing and seeing from corporates that there's interest in this high impact mechanism. They already buy RECs and they're interested in identifying projects. So we believe that there's opportunity to expand and grow and support additional projects. So we have slowly been growing this market. The first 2 PREC deals were in 2020 from DRC. In 2021, we issued the first PRECs from South Sudan, and this week we will be announcing the 4th PREC purchase and have successfully connected over $500,000 in PREC revenue to renewable energy projects in DRC and South Sudan. We're seeing growth in the demand and in the project pipeline, and we are launching a new fund called the PREC Aggregation Fund. So the examples I spoke of so far are projects that are already financed and built, and the revenue funded something additional. The idea for the fund is to have a pot of money that will be able to pre-purchase 10 years of PRECs, provide 10% of CapEx for projects that are not yet financed. So that will be a $10 million fund, and we believe it can unlock up to $90 million in new renewable energy investment in fragile states. So I will end there. Thank you very much.
$90 million, that takes us a good chunk to the $236 million that Mark needs to install solar power. We're about to hear about the status of the humanitarian energy sector, and I hope that I won't eat my words when we're in the session, but I do feel that things are shifting when it comes to creating new opportunities and taking small steps in the right direction to greening humanitarian energy operations and finding innovative financing solutions to make this as cost-effective as possible. We have some really tangible solutions here, and I think the PREX deal between IOM and 3 Degrees shows that there's always a way around institutional barriers when you put your mind to it. There's an elephant in the room, though, and my first question to open this panel discussion, I actually haven't thought about who I'm going to ask first. What does it take to make these solutions work in practice? Some of them are already in pilot phase and working in practice. WFP has incorporated this into their general operations. But what does it take, and what do you need from this room, from this audience, which is very diverse, from donors to implementers to end beneficiaries, private sector? What do you need from them to make your solutions, your approaches work, and to scale them? Does anybody have a fast answer to this? Mark? Thank you. Not anymore. The mic is not working. Come here. Or you take the... And in the meantime, please, you can think of questions. Aimee or Thomas or somebody will come around with a mic. I'm sure there are plenty. Okay, the mics are overworked. It's late in the day. Maybe you just need to come up here and make some points.
Hello? Hello?
Here, this one. This is off.
Hello? Yeah, very loud. What does it take? I think partners that really want to achieve something. I think everyone needs to have the same goal, and that is to service the needs of the displaced population and the operations that are serving those. And I feel that we've all been in projects where we've encountered team members that are applying the brakes rather than greasing the gears. And I think that's where we need to do, is looking at project teams that are focused on impact and looking towards scaling it as we go forward. And that's a real challenge for many organizations to work towards. And I think we have to look at our own organizations for that, in trying to pull together a project-focused team. That's a very difficult question.
No, but it's important points, like having the right people, the focus, having a joint mission, right? And I think
Exactly.
acknowledging the fact that these displacement settings are no longer temporary, unfortunately.
I think going in with an
That's the
open
first step.
mind that it is
Yeah.
a challenge. It's
Yeah.
not going to be easy. It is going to take time.
Anybody else got some thoughts on this? Otherwise, I'm going to hand over to the audience. I realize I threw a big one at you guys.
Yes, indeed. In our case, obviously, I think we mentioned before in the presentation, there are a few points that are mandatory for us to become viable. Diversification. We have these two different business models, and they have quite some complementarity. And adding to that, actually, just wanted to mention that together with Dave, we are now exploring also market entry for Ethiopia. So to add another business line for us to be able to further strengthen our market viability. Scale, mention, and bundling for the same reason. Operating in those areas is expensive. And those expenses are not easy to handle for a private sector. The only way out we found so far is really bundling and mutualization of cost. Deploying stuff in those areas doesn't come cheap, so it's very critical for us. And last but not least, obviously, like patient and risk-prone investors. Making business in Ethiopia, in the specific case of Ethiopia, is not an easy feat. We've come to where we are now thanks to like a looking forward approach from our investors and a clear vision of what we want to do and what we want to become. So I think all these 3 points together are what is making our model hopefully successful in the coming years.
Thank you, Andrea. Yes, George, please, from an investor's perspective. One question that I had when I was thinking about the session, reading up on all the fantastic materials that were provided, was around the currency risk in some of these countries. You mentioned Ethiopia, challenging situation. I was in Burundi a few weeks ago. The informal exchange rate for the dollar is through the roof compared to the official one. So how do we deal with that as investors? But George, you might have some other points as well to add.
Yeah, my first point is that it takes a lot of courage, moral courage, to get into unfamiliar investment model territories, for which no one has proved the eventual outcome. And it's not easy. You have to convince a lot of parties, not only probably you as a fund, but also your financiers, and they also have eventual financiers. So, you know, the chain flows. And then the second element is on the regulatory frameworks. Some policies exist that are supporting, others are non-supporting. So just navigating that hurdle to have eventually policies that support such innovative financing models is not an easy task as well. And then the third one is on mapping out the landscape, because eventually you have to understand the potential for whatever you are doing as an investor. Is it going to bring back returns? Do you have investment cases to begin with? And then lastly is the prototyping phase, which I believe is the most difficult for many, the most challenging. It takes, yeah, as I mentioned, a lot of courage. And the outcome is unknown in the prototyping phase. And once successful, everyone also wants to flow in. So it's also an activity or a phase that, yeah, determines everything else, and yeah, worth trying to engage in if you are able to. And I believe all of us are able to, yeah.
Great, thank you so much. I hear focus, knowledge, expertise, patience, courage. an appropriate enabling environment, piloting, testing, learning. None of you have mentioned money. That's very encouraging. Let me hand over to the audience, please. If there are any questions, please raise your hand. I'm sure there's a mic somewhere, or I can come with it. Oh, it's on the table. See? Okay, yeah, it's late. Sorry. Please go ahead.
Hi. My question is actually to Colm on the RBF financing or financing for clean cooking. My understanding is RBF is more targeted to the initial cost of the stove. In displacement settings where there may be more need for subsidy for ongoing fuel costs, I just wondered how that can be applied, or any other financing models, and also how it may be applied in the case of e-cooking as well.
Sorry, in the case of e-cooking?
Yeah, also if it's applicable there too.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, really good point. I think you know, part of the objective of RBF models typically is that initial cash transfer for an upfront cost associated with a stove. You know, I think what programs are currently doing is looking at how can we support the supply side specifically to develop the infrastructure to create that sustainable supply chain for fuel. I'm not aware of RBF payments or incentives being directly applied to ongoing fuel sales. Would certainly interested if anyone has experience of that. But you know, I think so far what has been happening is using grant funding or other supply side subsidies to help enterprises build up that distribution infrastructure and build those sustainable supply chains. Same goes, I think, with e-cooking. Certainly, you know, an opportunity maybe to subsidize electricity tariffs, and there are some examples out there of lower cost tariffs specifically for cooking. I think as we've seen recently in Uganda, a discounted tariff has been implemented for clean cooking, or is being proposed at least.
Please.
Well, thank you all for the great presentation. My question is for David. Actually, I had an interesting discussion with Mark from IOM, and what you're doing is really impressive. I have two questions for you, David. The first one is to give you a case from Jordan. I'm actually deployed by NORCAP at UNHCR East African office, East Africa region office. And my first question is, UNHCR Jordan owns a total of 22 megawatt peak solar parks. And this has been the case since, I believe, 2015. And can UNHCR claim the credits, either the carbon credit or the peace and social benefits, even if it's late? And do they reclaim the previous years, or it's only applicable for what they are, let's say, saving or avoiding in terms of carbon emissions? The second question is, carbon emissions or the footprint is really clear metric to calculate the footprint or the carbon credit. But what is the metric or the factor, maybe the metric for peace and social? Is there an example for that? Thank you.
Hello. Those are great questions. On Jordan, yes, UNHCR can claim RECs from those two solar projects. They would not qualify as PRECs because one of our criteria is that it's from a new project, but they would qualify as IRECs. And as a IREC authorized issuer, we can assist in facilitating the issuance of IRECs from those two projects in Jordan. And we should have a conversation after this and pick that conversation. They can't be claimed for years past. They can be claimed, like, I think up until the end of May for the previous calendar year, but prior to 2021 at this point, they can't. Carbon emissions metric is clear. So I think you hit the nail on the head. Defining peace impacts is not an easy thing to do. We have an impact line of work that we are building out that is working to develop a framework specifically for measuring the social and peace impacts of renewable energy projects. We have undertaken research over the last 4 or 5 years, context-specific research as well, trying to understand what is the role of energy in given conflicts in South Sudan and Mali and Somalia and DRC, and coming up with kind of a conflict prevention, mitigation, resolution thesis for how renewable energy can assist within a given conflict dynamic. But at a project level, one of the things we realized is that there's no existing framework actually, and there's no consensus for measuring, let alone valuing, the social impacts of renewable energy anywhere in the world. So we're working on trying to develop that. I know that there are other organizations working on impact as well. And so we can have a longer conversation. Our colleague who is leading that work will be here this week. Her flight was delayed, but she'll be arriving tomorrow. So if folks are interested, please come find us. And maybe just one last point. I fully agree with Mark's idea, and I think the idea of PPAs and using kind of internationally funded footprints as anchor clients to unlock larger projects makes so much sense. And it can help with the currency fluctuation. PREX can help with currency fluctuation. Those deals are denominated in dollars. International agencies, not all the agencies are international, but international agencies, their budgets are in dollars or in euros. So I think that there's a lot that can be done within this community to help mitigate some of the challenges that we've identified.
Thank you. The gentleman behind the cameras, he's a little bit hidden, so.
Hi, my name is Bahaj. I'm also from the University of Southampton, UK. Question to Andrea. I was a bit puzzled by your presentation. You mentioned your company is in Ethiopia currently. Do they plan to go to other countries? And if so, do you think, since you have an agreement with Mercy Corps, do you think the only company that could supply to Mercy Corps and to refugee camps will be your company? Is there a chance for the private sector to compete? And the second question is related to, you have an investment of 3 million already in the bag. Are you planning to recover that investment from the refugees themselves? Or is part of that funding going to be a grant funding to your company, and then you only charge a reduced tariff to the refugees? And how long will it take for you to pay for the investment?
Thank you. No, very interesting questions indeed. When it comes to the first one regarding other countries, for sure we'll focus on Ethiopia first. Then it will be up to our shareholder, I think, to make a call whether they find this model replicable and expandable to other countries. Definitely there's potential. But given the ambitions of this program for Ethiopia itself, for the time being, I think it's already enough on the plate for us. Regarding competition, absolutely, we are operating on an open market. Heavily regulated, mini grids are, like in any other country, so usually it's concession-based. But the reality is the Ethiopian market, when it comes to mini grid, is still heavily underdeveloped. We are among the first entrants. We're paving the way. We're happy to see more competition coming on the market, and we are very optimistic about it. But at the moment, we're the only players somehow positioning ourselves for that specific market. Regarding our financials, indeed, we have two business models. Mini grids are hardly ever the most attractive one. We are mostly focusing on being able to sustain operations through, for example, major maintenance reserve accounts that can sustain over 10, 15, 20 years our operation and replacement of components. We are budgeting around also to the capability to draw some profit, knowing that, however, all profit will be reinvested into further market expansion. The other business model, the one related to asset leasing, is definitely a bit more elastic when it comes to profitability, and it might become indeed the one supporting also a much quicker market expansion. So those two business models are both profitable, one probably more than the other, but both concur to somehow like sustainability of the company in the long run.
Thank you. Yes, one more question, and then depending on how long that takes, we might have time for one more.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. My question is, by the way, Adam Ostuszewski, NORCAP energy expert deployed to IOM, Geneva headquarters. My question is for my friend and former colleague Borja regarding the carbon tax that he mentioned in his presentation. Personally, I find this model to be very interesting, and I think that from everything that we've learned from the NORCAP perspective, trying to find financing for the projects that we need for energy transition, we come to this wall. And so the question is, where within these UN agencies and partners can we try to find the initial seed funding? So can you just share a little bit about the process for how WFP managed to get this approved initially, which I understand was several years ago? And can you talk a little bit more about how you plan to deploy these funds to help support the decarbonization and energy transition? Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I'm very happy for this question. When I arrived 3 months and a half ago, I found it already done. The internal carbon tax was already set. But now we are setting up a more ambitious one. That the one that is already set is only for the vehicles that we are leasing, or a global vehicle that we are leasing. So that's really not getting a lot of money, but good money to really work with. But now we are setting a new internal carbon tax, which is way more ambitious and is on commercial travels, on commercial flights, right? And that our staff is incurring. So that will really ramp up the program. How we are doing that? Well, a lot of political talks inside the organization and a lot of evidence showing to the decision takers. I think that's, I agree with you, it's a sustainable model to really have funding for the projects. And on the topic of how we invest them, there is I think I didn't mention that for the sake of being fast. We have somehow a ranking of projects. Projects are coming from our country offices, sub-offices, or even regional bureaus, and they apply to the funding, and we rank them in terms of decarbonization potential, but also intensity of the decarbonization per dollar funded. The O&M plan, which is a very important aspect, to really invest in projects that are sustainable in time, and also strategic value of the projects. So that's the way that we are somehow choosing the right projects to be funded. And again, we are only funding 75% of the project. 25% has to be coming from the country office itself to show commitment to the project. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, we're having side negotiations of whether we can do one more question. One quick one. Anyone? Otherwise, we'll wrap up. Okay, then I guess we'll wrap up. So please join me in thanking the panel for their presentations. And I'm looking forward to the follow-up discussions on all this. Thank you very much.